Okay, unlike Andy, I only have a very basic knowledge of the architectural history of the buildings on the university campus, and I can't hope to add anything to his absolutely fascinating talk. All I want to do today is to simply show you some photographs of buildings on campus, which are taken from a set of albums that we have in the university archives, and this is really in the hope that they will interest you enough to perhaps explore further. The albums were originally put together in the Estates Department to document the massive expansion of the Edgbaston campus in the post-Second World War period. I've tried to include most of the major buildings constructed in the 50s and 60s in the slideshow, but I've only been able to include a very small sample of the hundreds of photographs in these albums. We've been working to digitise them, and the entire contents are now available to view on our Flickr stream. There's a link through our website, and so I hope you'll be able to have a better look there. And what I want to do in this presentation is really emphasise the massive expansion of the campus during this post-war period. And I think this is what the Estates Department also had in mind when they put the albums together. The university had hoped to be able to move all academic departments to Edgbaston from the old Mason College buildings in Edmund Street, almost really from the university's foundation in 1900. The Calthorpe family had made an additional grant of land adjoining the additional site in the late 1920s, so this covered the area from the University Road, as it was known, so where the Harding Library is, up to Pritchett's Road. But it proved difficult to finance large-scale construction work in the 1930s and in the period immediately after 1945. So building work really didn't begin until the mid-1950s, following the development plans proposed by Sir Hugh Casson and Neville Conder, who also designed the Vale Halls of Residence, as we've heard from Andy. This aerial photograph shows the campus in the early 1930s, so this is after the Gilders Students' Building had been finished. You can just see that on the very far right of the slide, but before the Barber Institute had been built. And you can see there the imposing central avenue of poplar trees running from the Harding Library to the north gates on Pritchett's Road. This processional avenue was designed at the suggestion of the Calthorpe family, who'd made this gift of land. You can see the original buildings, including the Poynting Physics building on the right, just to the left of the Guild building there, and the Franklin Chemistry building on the far left, with the more recent Biological Sciences block next to Franklin, so between Franklin Chemistry and the Harding Library. This building in the middle there was completed in 1927. The other major building work that took place in the interwar period, other than the Guild and the Barber Institute, was of course the construction of the medical school and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, completed in 1939. They're just out of view of this photograph. The outbreak of the Second World War prevented further development on the Edgbaston site, and it was not until the mid-50s that building work began. The main library building, actually designed by Werner Rees, was constructed between 1956 and 59, but in 1957 Casson and Conder were appointed to develop the rest of the site. And I've just written some of the key points of their reports out here, giving an overview of their sort of vision for the development of the campus, and you can decide for yourself whether you think that that was achieved. So first back to Werner Rees and the main library building. The estate's photograph albums contain quite a large number of photos showing the construction process for the library, and also include some interior shots of the building. Obviously this is one of the most important on a university campus, to have a library. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, visited in May 1957 to lay the foundation stone, and the building was opened in time for the start of the 1959 to 1960 academic year. So on this slide you can see the early stages of work on the site on the left, and you can see part of the destruction of the central avenue. I think that photograph is dated autumn 1956. Then on the top right, an aerial photograph showing the steel framework of the building, and that's dated August 1957. And then at the bottom there on the right you can see the newly completed exterior, 1959. Then we've got some interior shots taken shortly after the building opened. There's two photographs on the left there of the main catalogue hall, which is now the Eye Lounge. There's some rather busy wallpaper down the far end wall. And of course you can see the banks of card index chests there in the bottom picture. The photograph on the right shows the main counter in the entrance hall in February 1960. Around the same time, the Barnes Library at the medical school was constructed, and the Harding Library, which was the original library on the Edgbaston campus, was converted for use by the law faculty. So, library provision dealt with. Another important facility was Staff House in the University Centre, which was originally known as the Refectory. These buildings were designed by Casson and Conder, and this slide shows on the left an architect's drawing of the proposed buildings, and then you can see on the right at the top the early stages of construction work. That photograph is dated January 1961, and then at the bottom there's an aerial view taken in November 1962 when they were completed. You can see the landscaping there of part of the University Square and the courtyard behind, and just there you can see the Biological Sciences building, which is in the process of being constructed. There was already a staff dining room in the basement of the Aston Webb building, and obviously facilities for students in the Guild, but with the arrival of the arts and education faculties from Edmund Street and the expected expansion of the university in the 1960s, better facilities for socialising and eating were urgently needed. This slide shows some interior views of rooms in Staff House and the Refectory. On the left at the top you can see the Senior Common Room Lounge as it's captioned on the photograph, and I think this is on the first floor where Cafe Aroma is now, for those of you familiar with it. And below is the room captioned on the photograph Technical and Clerical Staff Dining Room, which reflects the segregation of academic and non-academic staff, which was still a feature in the 1960s. On the right there you can see the Refectory extension built as a snack bar in 1966. Most recently this building's been used by NatWest Bank and the 19 Girls Farm Shop, but I think there have been various other businesses and shops using the premises after its use as a snack bar. Down at the bottom right there you can see evidence of the original layout of, I think that's the ground floor of the snack bar on the bottom right there. The Arts Building was also designed by Verner East, Lawrence and Mitchell. Construction work took place between 1958 and 1961. I've just set out various stages of the construction photographs here. You can just see the corner of the Watson Building on the photograph on the top right there. Watson Building was intended for mathematics and physics, also designed by Verner East, Lawrence and Mitchell, and helps to frame the courtyard there behind the Arts Building. The final photograph on the slide at the bottom right shows the Mason Lounge in the Arts Building, which looks very different today but is still dedicated to student use. These photographs show different stages of work on the Watson Building from early 1959 to August 1963, one on the right there, when the bridge over University Road and the courtyard had been completed. I think the bollards are presumably both a practical and decorative feature, and you can see the Barber Institute in the background there. These photographs show construction of what's called the Physics West building, which is part of the main Aston Webb semicircle. I was quite surprised to see these photographs dated in the album between 1957 and 59, as I'd assumed that the building was quite a lot older than that. 1957 to 59. Oh, yeah. I apologise. No, well, I was a bit... Yeah.
Everyone says it.
I think maybe the design was earlier, but I don't know. Yeah. Perhaps the most interesting buildings on campus are the Ashley and Strathcona buildings, originally constructed for use by the Faculty of Commerce and Social Sciences between 1962 and 64. You can see on the left a photograph of an architect's model of the two, and you can also see the foundations of the Ashley building on the top right there. That photograph dates from the summer of 1962, and at the bottom there with some of the interior walls. These buildings were designed by Howell, Killick, Partridge and Amos, which was a modernist practice employed at Casson and Conder's suggestion. These slightly later photographs show continuing work on the buildings in the autumn of 1963, and then on the right, part of the completed buildings dating these date from 1964 and 1965, and then there's one there of the interior of the Ashley building, which really a reflection of Andy's later photograph. This is something from 1965.
And I think they did win a prize.
Did they?
They won a prize.
Can I just point out
Yeah.
that that's got the original staircase with the barristers before they filled it, before they
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's always been like that. The staircase has gone up and up and up.
Yes, it's got a different rating now.
Yeah.
Oh,
What you said.
well, I haven't been in for about 20 years.
Okay.
Okay, there'll be opportunity for questions afterwards, so yes, Helen, please continue.
Okay. Moving across to the west of the campus now, these photographs show the construction of the Biosciences building designed by Plain and Lacey, who also designed the Haworth Chemistry building. So the photographs here were taken between 1961 and 63, with the one on the right, far right, dated slightly later, February 1964. You can also see an architect's drawing of the building at the top left of the slide. Having this new building meant that Biosciences could move out of their earlier location, which is next to the Harding Library, and then that was taken over by the law faculty. Haworth Chemistry building was constructed slightly earlier, from 1958 to 1960, and again you can see an architect's drawing on the top left of the slide. You can just see at the bottom left, that photograph, you can see the main library in the background there, and the edge of the Franklin Chemistry building in the photo. Built in a more traditional style, the mechanical and electrical engineering departments had been constructed during the 1950s, again on the west side of the campus, to designs by Peacock and Bewley. And as Andy says, this firm was developed out of the practice run by Jethro Cousins, who had designed the original Mason College buildings in the 1870s. Moving to the Vale site, I think this photograph would have been taken from one of the floors of the Chamberlain Hall Tower, originally known as High Hall. You can see the lake and both Wyddrington and Lake Halls and the two parts of Mason Hall, and then you can see the main university campus in the background. The university obtained this site from the Calthorpe family in the late 1940s, and then it was laid out in the 1950s to a Casson and Conder plan with the landscape architect Mary Mitchell. Some older trees from 19th century gardens were incorporated, but a new lake was created and the ground was remodelled. The university had received some government funding, but it also launched a public appeal in 1960 to raise money for student halls of residence on the Vale. At the time, the only student residences were University House for women and Chancellor's Hall on Augustus Road for men's students, and most students lived in private lodgings. The idea was to create 3 pairs of single-sex halls linked by shared dining and social facilities, although Mason Hall became a mixed hall fairly soon after its completion. High Hall and Ridge Hall remained single-sex until they became the mixed residence Chamberlain Hall in 1993, and Lake and Wyddrington became the mixed Shackleton Hall in 1998. High Hall and Ridge Hall were the first pair of residences to be built between 1962 and 64, designed by Harvey and Wicks. The estate's photograph albums contain proportionally more images of these 2 halls than the other Vale residences, and they also include quite a few interior views. High Hall was the town block and was for men's students, and Ridge Hall was for women's students. What you can see here in terms of interiors are the junior common room in Ridge Hall on the top right, and then the Ridge Hall section of the dining room on the bottom right. These photographs show Lake and Wyddrington Hall under construction, designed by H.T. Cadbury Brown, and these photographs date from 1963, 1964 time, I think. We don't have any interiors. Oh, actually we do. We have one of the kitchen of Lake and Wyddrington. Mason Hall was the final residence to be built, and it was originally 2 separate wings. 1964 to 1967 is the construction, designed by Tom Mellor and Partners. It became a mixed residence in the late 1960s. This building was actually demolished in 2006 and was completely rebuilt in 2008. Moving back to the main campus, the Munrow Sports Centre, designed by Chamberlain, Powell and Bond, was begun in 1963 but was not completed as originally planned. The first phase was completed in 1966, but rising costs led to the abandonment of the original design. A swimming pool and squash courts were eventually built in the late 1970s by another contractor. The photographs you can see here date from between 1963 and 64. You can see various stages of the construction process. There was already a gymnasium building on campus. It's the building now known as the Old Gym, but obviously the sports centre offered a much greater range of facilities for students and staff. These photographs show the construction of what was originally called the Radiation Physics Building, I think is now Medical Physics, on the south of the campus near the Guild of Students building, and these photos date from 1965 and 66. The education building designed by Casson and Conder was completed by 1969, which meant that the department could move out of the Aston Webb B block, where it had been since the closure of the Edmund Street site in 1960. Photos here date from 1966 and 1967. Finally, the building that Cadbury Research Library Special Collections is now housed in, Muirhead Tower, designed by Arup Associates, another modernist practice who also designed metallurgy and materials. Building work on this began in 1967, and the photograph on the right, I think, dates from the following year, 1968, and the building was largely complete by 69. It was originally intended for use by modern languages and commerce, and the drama department also used the basement, which included a theatre. The most intense period of construction work was over by 1970, but the campus has kept expanding and evolving in response to academic developments and changing needs for the use of buildings. I've just put this photograph in at the end to show the very different view from the 1930s view we started with. I think this is from the early 70s it dates from. So you can really see what's changed. So the estate's photograph albums are a very valuable source for anyone interested in 1950s and 60s buildings on campus, and I hope the digitised images on Flickr is going to draw more attention to them. So hopefully you've enjoyed this taster and we'll go on and have a look at the full set in your own time.